have to do with kind of the brain waves. I don't think they're a terrible thing, but what I see oftentimes with people that I've worked with is that they're really reliant on them. So reliant on them that they have kind of lost their natural ability to actually know if they're sleeping well or not. They're almost relying too much on their devices to say that they slept badly last night.
That's funny.
They look at it and say,
nope, I said I slept good. I must have.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what I was wondering about. Because I think if you don't sleep well, one of the things you sort of drift in and out of sleep. How do people journal that? Because it's like, I don't know how much I slept last night because I was thinking I was asleep, but I was awake, and I was thinking I was awake, and I turned out I was asleep, and it can get very confusing.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because a lot of the times people don't actually recognize how well or not well they're sleeping. Sometimes people are thinking that they're sleeping really poorly, but they're actually sleeping okay. Sleep has a phase. So there are stages or phases to sleep. There's the very light sleep. There's that sort of dozing on the couch. Or the boring lecture, I like to say, in a warm room when you definitely feel yourself nodding off. We then shift into something that's a little bit called light sleep, and it's something that is actually when the body and the brain are starting to transition. Then there's deep sleep, there's REM sleep, and then there's also a wakeful state. So you could be in any number of those over the course of your night 4 or 5 times, maybe even 6 times, depending on how long you're in bed. So there are times where you are awake. Some of us get up in the middle of the night and have to go to the bathroom. Some nights we're able to do it and get right back to bed, and other nights, we're wide awake for some reason. And so that's just a natural pattern. So for the sleep log, I really just want to know when you think you've been sleeping and when you think you've been awake, but not so much the detail on like what phase you're in. Through the sleep log, I can actually look and see like, okay, it looks like you're spending a lot of time in bed, but you're not actually sleeping. And from that, I try to coach people to spend less time in bed to more closely match what it is that when they're actually sleeping. Because sometimes we get into that negative association with bed.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm hearing you say is that you go through a number of cycles, and some of them might be awake cycle, or a little bit of an awake cycle, or maybe a light sleep. Because I know for a very long time, almost every single night, I would wake up, I'd look at my clock, it's 3:00, say, oh, it's 3:00, I can sleep more, and go right back to sleep. So that was just like a cyclical thing, a circular thing. It wasn't really a sleep disruption. It was more just that I was in those patterns. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds like you might have had a pretty standard pattern where, at 3 a.m. for a while, you were waking up, and a lot of us experience that, where that just happens to be when the wakeful phase is coming around, and yours just happened to be happening at 3 a.m. And it woke you up enough that you were like, oh, kind of maybe confused about the time, looking over to your clock. It's great that you say, oh, it's 3 a.m. I've got more time to sleep. That's like what we want people to say. But a lot of the times people look and say, oh, no, it's 3 a.m. I'm stuck being awake. So we want to sort of change that perception that people have.
I thought I had read, and it was sometime years ago maybe, that when that we should, this idea of an uninterrupted block of 8 hours of sleep is actually a modern invention. That before there were light bulbs and electricity, that people would go to sleep when it got dark and then wake up in the middle of the night and do stuff, and maybe have a meal, or do write or do some sort of activity, and then go back to sleep and then get up in the morning. And have you heard that? Or
It's absolutely true that there were periods of time. I think that, like, if you look back at some literature written probably around like Victorian and Edwardian times, there are references to people actually getting up and almost like going out and seeing their neighbors, but that it wasn't uncommon for people to be up for 1 to 3 hours in the middle of the night and then going back to bed and sleeping for a little bit more in the morning. So it does lend itself to this idea that, yeah, we're not supposed to just fall asleep at 9 o'clock and wake up 8 hours later. We do, in fact, have this cycle that the body and the mind go through, and that's intentional. The brain can't and shouldn't spend all of its time in its deep sleep. That would be actually something that would be more of like a sleeping disorder. We need for there to be this sort of phasing in and out. The dream phase has a purpose, but then when that dream phase is over, we move back into that lighter sleep, and maybe that's when we wake up and notice the clock and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's absolutely true that historically we don't sleep necessarily that soundly, and that's pretty modern.
Yeah.
So if you had to choose quality over quantity, which would you choose? Quality of sleep or quantity of sleep?
I think quality of sleep, for sure. Especially as we get older, our sleep patterns change. We no longer need the sleep pattern that we needed when we were, 6 months old. Even when we're 17 or, in our teenage years, things change. And so I think it's important to think about the quality and not necessarily the quantity. I think people get too wrapped up in this idea that 8 hours of sleep is what we need, when actually the older you get, the less you need. And actually the less you need at night. Sometimes you just need a little cat nap in the afternoon. And that's something that can add to the quality of your sleep as well.
Huh. So actually napping in the afternoon can be a good thing?
It's totally acceptable.
Awesome. We are happy about that. That's good to hear. So we're down.
I will advise, though, that if you're going to take a nap, you don't take a nap for more than 20 or 30 minutes. Okay. Once you get into 45 minutes or an hour, that's when that full sleep cycle starts to happen. And when you get pulled into that deep sleep, and maybe you've experienced this, sometimes when you come out of your nap and you've come out of that deep sleep phase, you're kind of a little cranky. You might have a little bit of a headache. You might feel a little sluggish and not be able to kind of like get your day going again. Yeah. And so that's why I advise people to stick to like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And you'd be surprised. It's very restorative to only have that much time.
I can't confirm or deny.
Good. I like that. I'm taping that part.
I was going to say
that's on a loop.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my husband would 100% agree with, should my naps be longer than 20 minutes, I might wake up a little, we use the term salty.
Salty, yes.
So we're down to just 3 minutes left, believe it or not. So if you could talk about how to get, you have two programs. You have the Get to Sleep program and the Foundation of Sleep. So if you could briefly just describe each, and then how people can contact you if they want to follow through on either of those programs.
Yeah, that's great. So Foundations of Sleep is a workshop that I run usually every other month, and that's intended to just kind of do this wide sweep of people who might be curious about their sleep patterns. So it could be people who have chronic insomnia, but it could also be people who are just like, my sleep is changing. What's up with that? So Foundations of Sleep, it's a 4-hour workshop, and basically we just go over the finer details, a lot of what I've mentioned here about what sleep is and what insomnia is and how to get a better relationship to your sleep. And then the Get to Sleep program is something that I offer to people perhaps after they've done the foundations, but you can also just do it on its own. And that's a 1-to-1 individual course that meets it's usually about 4 to 6 times over the course of 6 to 8 weeks. And that's where we're looking at the log and we're actually modifying and adjusting people's sleep behaviors and sleep patterns. And that's where it's just a little bit, by the time you're done with that 8 weeks, you're pretty much back to sleeping normally. Nice. And the way to get in touch with me for either of those would be to go to the website, which is villageyogavt.com. And there is right on the homepage a badge that says sleep coaching, and you can just click right on that. And that'll take you to a form where you can reach out to me. Or, as you guys have so nicely put, you could call or you could use my email address to just reach out to me and say, I've got sleep problems. I'd love to know more.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a very enjoyable, enlightening show.
And we didn't fall asleep.
And we didn't fall asleep, but we're prepared at
so
any
I don't
moment.
know. Maybe I didn't do my job so well.
No, I feel so much better about the waking up at 3 a.m. though. I mean, that's because I always thought that was like I was having bad sleep. So I've definitely learned something.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Jennifer. I hope you have a wonderful holiday. And that's it for the feed. We'll see you next week.
Bye, community.
Local news, politics, business, sports, arts, music. Mike and Mike.